All right, it looks like we have a handful of people still trying to join the meeting, so I'm going to give them about 30 more seconds and then we will get started. Okay, so we'll go ahead and kick it off. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Foose. I am with the Development Services Department here at the City of Reno. And joining me is Grace and Lauren. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Grace McAdin. I am a Senior Management Analyst with Development Services.
And I'm Lauren Knox. I'm a Senior Planner with Development Services as well.
Great. So just so you all hopefully are in the right meeting, this is a meeting to talk about some of the text amendments or the housing initiatives we're working on here at the City of Reno. We have a presentation. We'll probably take about 30 minutes and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. As we're going through the presentation, if you want to throw any kind of written chat into the chat box, go ahead and do that. And then at the end, I'll follow up. I just want to make sure that we get through the presentation before we open it up to questions and answers, just in case we run long. So feel free to use that chat box. And then at the end, we'll go through and answer all your questions. And so with that, I'm going to share my screen and we'll kick it off. Okay, so just a kind of bigger picture, help everyone understand why we're doing this. Housing and affordability really has been a topic and a priority for our city council for a number of years. It was about 3 years ago, we adopted a new zoning code. And after the zoning code adoption, where we'd spent a couple years working on it, we went back to city council and we said, okay, we've conquered that. Let's put together some initiatives that now you want us to work on. So we had them rank really what the priorities were. And number one, among pretty much all of our council members from 3 years ago was housing and affordability. And so, that means a number of different things to different people. One is just the housing supply. Two is the cost of housing. And there's many ways that we can address that, whether it's through an ordinance dealing with short-term rentals or the Airbnbs or VRBOs. Other things that our council has asked us to look at would be an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU. So we're working on a number of different things, focusing specifically on what today's topic is. This is tied to just our zoning code, so not other city initiatives, but strictly speaking within our zoning code, things that we can do to help with the affordable side of housing and also kind of the housing production and supply. So again, just bigger picture, when you say the word affordable housing and just housing production, it means different things to different people. So understand the context of today is specific to just our zoning code, things that we can look at changing to address housing and affordability just within our zoning code. And then second from that is more recently with our last legislative session, and here in the state of Nevada, our legislature meets twice, every 2 years. And so they had their last meeting, it finished on June 30th. And so with that, anytime we have new bills that are passed, we have to update our ordinances. So Assembly Bill 213 was adopted, and specific to the affordability component, they adopted a bill that basically said local governments shall enact an ordinance. So that means we have to adopt something that addresses two things. One is, how do we expedite affordable housing projects? And two is, how do we incentivize affordable housing projects? So this was some very specific language that Assembly Bill 213 proposed. And so now we as a local jurisdiction are tasked with coming up with something. We do have a deadline of July 1st of this year. So we've been working on this really since this was adopted last summer. And so we've gone through a number of different meetings with city council and with stakeholders and our planning commission. And so where we're at now is trying to get a little bit more feedback on some of their comments before we take this back to our city council. Now, when we started looking at housing and affordability, we said, well, what are other communities doing and why are they doing it? This housing crisis is not unique to Reno. And it's not unique to Nevada. This is something the entire country is really just grappling with. Cities across the board are kind of asking themselves the same questions. What can we do to help solve the problem of housing and affordability? And again, everyone's kind of looking at it from different lenses. Some jurisdictions are taking very conservative approaches. Some are taking very expansive approaches and saying, let's get rid of all, single family zoning and make single family allowed everywhere. Some of them are saying, let's get rid of density as a whole. So whatever density you want in any zoning district, as long as it brings more housing, we'll support. So, when we looked at all these other jurisdictions and we kind of found some trends, and we said, well, what is something that would fit for Reno? We want to be careful not to make any change that's going to significantly impact our community in a negative way. Just being sure that, we want to protect those neighborhoods and the character of Reno. Like, reason as to why many of you who chose to move to Reno like Reno and you want to live here and work here. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining that character. So the changes that we as staff have proposed, again, were something that we looked at other jurisdictions across the country, and we said, let's scale that to a level that we think the city of Reno would want to support and that our council would be willing to do. So again, we didn't make this up. This is something many jurisdictions across the board are doing. So we have this presentation really broken down into two categories. One is strictly related to affordable housing. And the second one is more of the housing supply without any kind of affordability. So specifically related to affordable housing, we have kind of two big initiatives that we're proposing. Number one, when we deal with housing, one of the goals of, or the things we're trying to accomplish here is to help get affordable housing to market faster. So what can we as a zoning administrator do to help with that? So we came up with some ideas of projects that are truly affordable, meaning they are at, let's say, a 60% of an area median income, meaning they are being subsidized. They aren't just some market rate apartment that's saying they're affordable. They truly are affordable, and we require them to be affordable for at least 20 years. So if you come in and you get subsidies, either from HUD or from the state or federal, you have to be tied to those affordability rates for at least 20 years. We do have a checks and balances system. Anytime you have an affordable housing project, we do annual reviews to make sure that you are staying affordable and meeting those requirements. And so we pretty much lock you in for 20 years to meet those requirements. So if you're able to meet those requirements, what we propose is that your project would be able to go straight to a building permit and not have to go through any kind of public review or entitlement process. Now, number one, I should say, is you have to be in a zoning district that allows apartments. So this isn't like a carte blanche. You can build apartments wherever you want. Number one is, does the zoning district you're in allow apartments? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then again, you still have to meet all your zoning code requirements. You'd have to meet your setbacks. You have to meet parking requirements. You have to meet your landscape requirements. You have to meet the size requirements. All of that you still have to meet. But we're saying you can go straight to a building permit, in which case you could get through any entitlement review that you otherwise would not be able to do. So second from that is once you get to a building permit stage, we're proposing to have a staff liaison, so somebody that works for the city of Reno, to basically help to process those affordable housing projects through the building permit process. Now, typically our staff, when we get a building permit, we review the building permit typically within 2 business weeks or 10 days. And that's pretty quick. Many jurisdictions take months to get through a building permit review process, but we're pretty quick. Now, what we found is a lot of times we'll provide a lot of comments. Our fire department looks at it, our building department, our engineering department, our planning department, all these different departments look at it and make sure it meets all of our different codes and requirements. And then we work with the developer, their architect, and their civil engineer to make sure that they are responding to all of our comments and making all those changes. So again, that staff liaison would be doing that job. Now, big picture, you may be thinking, holy cow, this town is going to get flooded with affordable housing projects. Not true. I will say right now, this is probably going back 20 years worth of data. We generally get 2 to 3 affordable housing projects per year. So on a yearly basis, we're talking a very small number of projects that we're processing that would first meet that 60% area median income and be able to go straight to a building permit. And then B, our staff would help them to process them faster, to expedite them through the building permit review process. So that's what staff proposed. We took that to Planning Commission. And Planning Commission said, I think that's great, but I also think you could do better. So in an effort to actually do more, and again, specific to affordable housing projects, they came with a couple additional incentives. Now, one of them was the height. So in any zoning district, you are limited to a certain height. A lot of our multifamily zoning districts, you're limited to maybe 2 stories or 3 stories. And so Planning Commission said, instead of that 2-story or 3-story requirement, let's add an additional 2 stories if you meet that affordability requirement. So we provided just an example of what that could look like. That picture on the top is an existing affordable housing project. It's 3 stories tall. Again, if this was approved and they were able to come in with 2 additional stories, that picture on the bottom is an example of what going from 3 stories to 5 stories would look like. Now, the second thing that Planning Commission recommended is that we eliminated any requirements specific to setbacks. So if they wanted to meet their building setbacks, meaning how far their building is from a property line, they could do that. If they wanted to deviate or have a less setback, Planning Commission's recommendation was to allow them to reduce their setbacks by right, meaning no public review process. And then the third one was to remove any requirements for parking. For the most part, when an affordable housing project comes in, we work with them to figure out parking that kind of fits with what their needs are. A lot of times it's let's say a senior affordable housing project, and just their demographic maybe doesn't need as many parking spaces as you would for a normal market rate or family apartment. So Planning Commission's recommendation was, let's just take out any requirements at all. If you still want to provide parking, that's great, but you're not mandated or required to provide parking. So again, those were some additional things that Planning Commission recommended. That has not been reviewed by City Council at this point. We're just collecting feedback. So this is just something that is a draft until we go to the City Council to get their input. Okay, and then the next kind of big topic specific to affordable housing was this density bonus. So currently in our zoning code, we allow you to have more units or more density if you provide an affordability component. So as an example, if you have 10 units and you're allowed to build 10 units because your zoning code allows you to have those 10 units. In our current zoning code, if you provide that affordable housing component, we allow you to go up to 45% more. So if you can do 10 units by right, 45% more would give you an additional 4 units. So instead of 10 units, now you can do 14 units. And what we're proposing is to increase that. What we're proposing is if you have that 60% area median income, truly affordable housing, that we would allow you to have unlimited density. Now, from staff's perspective, you are still required to meet all the same requirements. Your height would be the same, setbacks would be the same. You still have to fit everything within that building footprint, but you could squeeze more units in there if they were smaller units. So again, something that we're proposing. Now, we did go back and look at our existing density bonus regulations. Again, it's in code now, and just going back at least 3 years, how many affordable housing units have we been able to get because of that density bonus that's in code now? The answer is 1. We've had 1 unit that was affordable that came online using the density bonus. So that, again, was very telling to us that maybe the way our code is currently written doesn't provide enough flexibility to really incentivize affordable housing to use that density bonus. So that's where we decided, let's propose to do more and have that unlimited density. Now, the other thing we currently don't have in our zoning code is more that workforce housing. We don't currently incentivize anything for workforce housing. That's more that 80% area median income all the way up to 120%. That's something that at the state level, they were really pushing, I would say, local jurisdictions to do more to support. And so what we propose is to add a density bonus if you are meeting that 80% to 120%, or really anything more than 60% area median income. Now, we do limit the amount of density, but what we're proposing is if you're in that 60 to 80% workforce housing, that you could increase the density by up to 45%. And then if you're in that 80 to 120%, that you could increase the density bonus by 35%. So that concept as a whole, we shared with Planning Commission. and they didn't have any changes. They were in support of that. So again, those are kind of the two big topics specific to affordable housing that we're proposing with this zoning code change. Next up is we have a couple things tied specifically to housing and more of housing supply. There's been a lot of talk again across the country about what jurisdictions are doing to increase housing. And a lot of them are really trying to focus on infill. You know, as a community, we have a master plan, and the master plan encourages things like walking and having people live close to where they work and where they go to school and where they do their shopping. So infill is really something that our master plan encourages the city to do. And so as we were looking at ways to bring in more housing without creating sprawl, we really tried to focus it on where is this infill development and how do we encourage more of it? Okay, so within, again, not affordability, just all apartments in general, we already have a density bonus in our zoning code. And when we looked at the last 3 years, you know, how many of these development projects that have come in have used this density bonus? We've had probably 12 projects in the last 3 years that use this density bonus, which is great. So 12 projects may seem like a lot of affordable, or I'm sorry, just regular market rate apartments. But when we look at how many additional units total, it was more like 60 total units. So a lot of these projects are really small, or your infill type projects where you're adding 1 or 2 additional units. And so we looked at that and we said we could probably do better. So here's kind of 3 bullet points of what our code says today, and then what we're proposing to increase. Again, with this density bonus for market rate, it's not based on the price or the amount you're charging in rent. It has nothing to do with the cost of the apartment. It has to do with the size of the apartment. So the smaller the unit, the more density bonus you would get. As an example right now, let's say you had 10 units that you could fit on your lot. Maybe you had a really small site and you could fit 10 units, and they were all small. They were all 1,000 square feet in size or less. And so right now we allow you to do a 45% density bonus if you want to get a couple more units. And so what we're proposing is to increase that. So instead of 45% density bonus, going up to 80%. So as an example, again, if you had 10 units today, with today's density bonus, you could add 4. And what we're proposing is to increase that. So instead of 4 units, now you can increase it up to 8 more units. So total, instead of 10 units on your little site, you could have 18 units. You still have to meet your building height requirements and your setback requirements and your parking requirements. So everything else, you still have to meet code. You could just squeeze more units in than what the current zoning would allow. We have a couple examples just to walk you through so you can better maybe illustrate in your mind what that looks like. Here's an example of a Motel 6 that was located off of 7th and Keystone in that Stardust area. And initially they had a motel with 124 rooms, and they wanted to take each room and convert it into a residential unit. So they cleaned them up, added kitchens, so they were actually livable units. But because of the zoning, they were capped at only allowing 88 units, which seems like a waste. So we had this motel with 124 motel rooms, and they wanted to convert each of those into a place where individuals could live. Because the zoning limited the zoning or the density, they could only convert 88 of those units. They were able to use the existing code, which allowed for that density bonus. And this, again, was not affordable at all, just a regular market rate apartment project. They were able to get that additional 36 units just with that density bonus. So this is a really good example of reuse. You know, from a cost perspective, they didn't have to tear the building down. They were able to use what they already had and just reuse something and actually add more housing to the market. So I think that was probably our best example of density bonus from existing construction. We have another example. This is over near Wells Avenue off of Grand Canyon. And this was a brand new site, so a brand new build. And they came in, it was a tiny site. It was less than half an acre, so pretty small. And they wanted to do apartments. And so they could fit 16 apartments just based on the zoning code. Based on that density, they were allowed to have those 16 units. But they used that density bonus and they were able to add 2 more units. So pretty small in terms of like, is it moving the needle on housing? Not a lot, but those tiny little infill projects, they can definitely benefit from having the ability to add even just 1 or 2 more units. So in this case, again, great example. You know, it's 3 stories. They had to show where they have parking for all of their total of 18 total units, plus landscaping. So they still have to meet all those requirements. They were able just to add 2 more units that went above and beyond what the zoning code would allow. And then next big topic is development by right. So when we say development by right, that means it goes straight to a building permit and doesn't have to go through any kind of public review process. We have a number of different processes. Sometimes it takes 30 days to go through an extra review. Sometimes it takes 6 months to go through an extra review. So we looked at what other local jurisdictions are doing. You know, what's the trigger for what would have to go to, let's say, a planning commission review. And generally speaking, a lot of jurisdictions use the threshold of 100 units. Anything more than 100 units would trigger going through a public review process. Anything less than 100 units would be able to go straight to a building permit. So we looked at our zoning code and we said, well, what are we at right now? Our zoning code specific to these 5 different zoning districts, these multifamily zoning districts, and these commercial zoning districts, they do require an additional entitlement review if there's more than 20 and less than 100. And so we said, well, again, considering what Sparks is doing and Fernley and Henderson, we even looked at other cities outside of Nevada. What are they doing? And generally speaking, 100 units was the threshold that a lot of communities are using to require a public review process. So what we proposed is, again, the smaller projects less than 100 units, we go straight to a building permit. And again, keep in mind, they still have to be in the right zoning district to allow for apartments. It's not just a catch-all. So you have to be in a zoning district that allows for apartments, and you still have to meet all your other zoning requirements. Just to give you an example of a couple projects that have had to go through some kind of entitlement, that if this was passed, when these projects came forward, they would be able to go straight to a building permit and would have not had to go through that public review process. So Vesta Apartments, that is in the Midtown area. It's a great little infill project with 40 units. It's 4 stories. It has parking on the ground floor and 3 stories above. It's under construction now. Or Vada Apartments. That is an affordable housing project. They did have to go through that entitlement process for 40 units. That one is built, and so it's a great example, so you can see what it looks like and what 40 units looks like. And then on the very right, that Grand Canyon, which is that one we just talked about, just 18 units. They also did have to go through that public review process. And for the most part, these projects probably, I would say, took 3 to 6 months to have to go through that additional entitlement, where if they had been able to go straight to a building permit, they still would have had to have followed all the same rules and regulations, but they could have been to market faster. Okay, and then finally, it's this concept of missing middle. This is probably a term many of you have heard and said, well, what does that actually mean? So missing middle means, well, what if you're not apartments? And what if you're not single family? What's in the middle there? You know, maybe I'm retired and don't want to live in a single family home, but yet I want some kind of ownership, or maybe something that's not in a multifamily development. So there's other options, and Reno doesn't have a lot of other options. And this is kind of an interesting little data research that we found, is looking at where we allow duplex, triplex, and fourplex. We allow it in many, many places in our city, but we don't see a lot of that type of development, which was kind of interesting. And there's some great examples here on the bottom of what it could look like. I think a lot of people associate with a duplex or a triplex as something like, oh gosh, I don't want that in my neighborhood. So we wanted to give you some examples of kind of cool different styles of what that housing product could look like, so that you don't feel that, oh, it's going to ruin the character of my neighborhood. So we have a total of 4 different single family zoning districts. And right now in 2 of those, you can already do duplex, triplex, and fourplex. You still have to go through a public hearing. We call that a conditional use permit, but in 2 different zoning districts, single family zoning districts, it's allowed today. Now we expanded that and we said, well, let's add it to the other 2 single family zoning districts. So what this is proposing is in that SF3 and SF5 zoning district, we proposed adding duplex, triplex, and fourplex to be allowed. We still proposed that it would require a public review, a conditional use permit, so it would go through a planning commission process. But again, just trying to add more of that missing middle type of development to the market. Now, here is just a map so you can better understand. Everywhere in green is where duplex, triplex, and fourplex can be built today. So it's a pretty big stretch of our city where you can do that today. It's a lot of that's our multifamily zoning districts or mixed use zoning districts, but also again, 2 of our single family zoning districts with that public review process. So what we're proposing is everything in orange. That's SF3 and SF5. That would be added, but also would still require that conditional use permit. So there would be a public review process before it was approved. We took that to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission liked the idea and said, let's expand on that. They felt that within all 4 of our single family zoning districts, we should allow duplex, triplex, and fourplex by right, meaning without that public review process, go straight to a building permit. So again, not some major changes here, but again, just to give you an idea of the area in yellow or orange are those 4 different zoning districts where Planning Commission felt that they should be allowed by right without that public review process. And you may say, oh my gosh, what if we get just a bunch of duplex, triplex, and fourplex coming to the market? So this has been in our code, again, for a number of years, probably close to 20 years, where we've allowed duplex, triplex, and fourplex in all these different parts of the city. And we really haven't had a lot of development come forward requesting duplex, triplex, and fourplex. So just to give you an example, within the past couple years, we looked at the last 3 years, I think we've had maybe, gosh, probably less than 30 duplex units come forward to a building permit. So in 3 years, again, that's citywide, about less than 30 units coming forth with a duplex. We just don't see a ton of that type of development. I don't think what's proposed either by staff or by Planning Commission is going to significantly change a whole lot. But I do think it's some small steps that we can do. Now, keep in mind too, that we do in all of our single family zoning districts, we have a lot of strict requirements. One of them is coverage. So we limit how much of your building can fit on a piece of property. So let's say you're in a single family zone and your lot is maybe 10,000 square feet. We limit how much of that 10,000 square feet can be covered with a building. So that I think is one of the challenges that makes it hard for developers to actually build anything with much density in these single family zoning districts, because we have so many other rules and regulations that limit development. So all of that would still be in play. Again, I think that the concerns we're generally hearing is, oh, I'm going to have a big apartment complex built next to me. No, not necessarily. Again, you still have all these same rules and regulations that limit on how much development can go and be built in any single family neighborhood. So all those regulations would still be in play. And then just big picture, we wanted to let people know too that none of these proposed changes would have any effect on our building code requirements. Those are all still required. Same with our fire code requirements. And then generally speaking, all the zoning code requirements. The things we talked about affect both the affordable housing projects, again, some of the deviations that you would, like setbacks that Planning Commission proposed, that would get you out of having to meet your setbacks if you did an affordable housing project. But it doesn't mean that you can just build affordable housing or apartments anywhere. You still have to be in a zone that allows for apartments, and you still have to meet the requirements for parking and landscaping and height and all those other coverage requirements. Just bigger picture too, we just wanted to make sure that people understood that all of this is still up for discussion. We've had a number of stakeholder meetings, and so the feedback has been kind of all over the place. Some people are in support and say, why aren't we doing more? Others, I think, are looking for us to kind of scale this back and not move forward too quickly. So at this point, we are just looking for feedback. We're holding these 4 stakeholder meetings right now, and then we will go back to City Council just to share the input that we've received. That's going to happen on May 8th. So we definitely encourage anyone that wants to provide written feedback to do so either to staff or to Planning Commission or City Council, and we can make sure that that feedback gets passed along to our City Council. Okay. Again, just timing wise, here's where we're at. I think May 8th is the day I just talked about. Then the other dates that we're looking at, we're going to have to go back to City Council multiple times through this process. So May, June, and likely July are the additional months that we're going to be looking at having this discussion with our council members. Okay, so I will go ahead and stop there, and I'm going to open it up to our chat to see if we had any questions from the group.
It looks like we don't have anything in chat, but Shelley Brown raised her hand. So I'll let her talk.
Okay, so Shelley, if you want to just unmute yourself and then feel free to ask a question again for anyone that's on the attendees list. If you're not comfortable speaking, but just want to put a question in the chat, feel free to do that as well. And Shelley, whenever you're ready.
Shelley, it looks like you're still on mute. You can come back to Shelley. It looks like we do have another hand raised and some questions in the chat. Do you want to do the next hand first or the chat?
Okay, and it looks like if I pronounce your name wrong, I apologize. Is it Maya?
All right, Maya, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
So I just want to start out by saying I think these are great proposals. I'm kind of on the we could do more side, but even if we just do this, I think it would be a big improvement. I had a couple of questions though, and I guess I should probably just go with one to begin with. And maybe we can get back to me so that people have a chance. So some of this is tied to, as I understand it, subsidized housing that we're calling affordable housing.
Correct.
And I think that's great. Like, I guess the goal there is to try to encourage developers to use that available subsidy when possible. One concern that I have, and I'm kind of wondering how we might address this or just kind of prevent it from being a problem, is so the only way that we can really do these affordable like 60% AMI projects, as I understand it, is if the developers are able to secure funding from, say, HUD, from the state,
Correct.
the examples you gave. So one thing I'm concerned about is if just due to factors outside the city's control, that funding just isn't sufficiently available, that projects wouldn't be able to take advantage of some of these more permissive requirements just because they can't get the funding. And then it would be a market rate project, and then we'd be like leaving projects on the table because it depends on availability of subsidies that are like just like that it could become a bottleneck.
Correct. No, that's a great question. I think a lot of people don't realize that affordable housing, truly a subsidized affordable housing projects, they are very hard to do. We have a number of developers that really specialize in affordable housing, and so they go after kind of the buckets of money that comes out annually from HUD and from the state and from the federal government. And so this really targets, from an affordability perspective, this targets those projects. We also wanted to add, more to our zoning code to help with just housing production. And so that's kind of why we broke this up into two categories. One is at the state level, they have required that we adopt an ordinance specific to affordable housing. And so we have, again, those incentives for that. And then separate from that is just some of the incentives we're trying to provide for just housing in general, specifically infill if we can get more of it. But the affordable housing piece, it is a problem. And we typically get 2 to 3 projects a year here in the city of Reno, which isn't a lot. So, I mean, these changes, I don't think will drastically increase the affordable housing projects that we get. I think it will allow those projects to bring maybe a couple more units to market that they weren't able to get before.
Okay, that makes sense. And I've kind of got some follow-ups, but I don't want to just hog the chat. So maybe you can get back to me if somebody else has a question.
Yeah, it looks like Shelley, it looks like you still have your hand raised. Maybe we can bring Shelley back in, and then Maya will come back to you.
Great, thank you.
All right. All right, Shelley, you should be able to unmute. And just for clarification, some people had said the chat was disabled, so you can type your question in the Q&A option.
All right. Yeah, it looks like, Shelley, we're not able to hear you on our end. If it helps, if you want to maybe try typing something into the chat.
And we do have a question in the chat. Not sure if you can see it, Angela.
Okay. So I'll just read this just from one of the attendees. It says, it looks like they're in support. We need more infill. And they want to know if we can do more to, in terms of our code, when we take out housing, can we do more to require that people replace that housing? And the example they gave was like the Jacobs Entertainment. So just for the group's understanding, Jacobs Entertainment, it's more of a broader area. It's on 4th Street, 5th Street in our downtown area where a property owner has come in and bought up a handful of different properties and torn down some of the motels and some of the more kind of vacant buildings. And so I think the question here is, can the city do more to require those types of developments to then to have to replace housing with maybe some of the units that they tore down? At this point, we don't have anything proposed to do that. I'm sorry, I don't know that I've even heard that in all the public stakeholder meetings we've had, but I don't know that I've seen that in other jurisdictions either. So definitely, I think something worthwhile to look at, and I think we can take a look to see if that's something other jurisdictions have done, if there's maybe a way to propose something like that. But at this point, that has not been proposed, at least for this area. Oh, you're on mute, Grace.
We have some more hands up. So Nona Perry, I'm gonna move you over and you should be able to unmute and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Hey, I came late, so I apologize for that right up front. My question is, since this is under the auspices of affordable housing, if someone were to build say 1 unit on their property next to their house, is it under some sort of long-term obligation to the affordable rent? Is it under something separate from just the basic rental agreements out there?
Yeah, so
Long-term, short-term?
great question. Anything that is deemed as affordable and they get these incentives for providing affordable housing, they have to show that they are requiring that affordability for 20 years. So we do make them deed restricted, and we do annual reviews where we go back and we do reporting where they have to report what their rents are and prove that they're still meeting that 60% area median income.
Does that flow with the property if it's sold and rebought and sold?
It is.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
I mean, just so you know too, we typically don't see it for single family homes. I can't think of any projects in the Reno market anyway, even in the last 20 years, where we've seen single family homes use that, you know, affordable housing subsidy, but where we see it is apartment projects. And so they would come in and usually get some kind of government subsidy. And so with the government subsidy, they're tied for 20 years. Some subsidies require to even be tied to 30 years.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
All right, next is Art. Should be able to unmute.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Art.
Thanks, Angela, for your presentation. And you're so right. This is a problem all over the country. One of the big concerns I have is that unlike other states, Nevada has very limited public resources for affordability.
Yep.
I guess the big concern I have has to do with how properties in what are currently zoned single family zones, the different families, single family zones within Title 18, how they would handle and how over time, 10, 20 years from now, they could substantially change the character of the neighborhoods, the single family neighborhoods. Well, I guess, and this kind of has to do with the question that Meyer had about what to prevent a property owner to come in, say in a single family property and say, I want the density bonus, but then doesn't follow through to get the, go through the affordability process. So that, so that unit is really going to be subsidized for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
They decided we want the bonus, but we're not going to apply for the Section 8 or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
What guarantees does the community have that will not happen?
So when they come in at the time of building permit, we won't release the building permit until they have that deed restriction and they can show us how they've already been approved for affordable housing. And so then they are tied for 20 years and we lien the property and deed restrict the property that for 20 years, they have to maintain that affordability.
Okay, I appreciate that. The thing that I see about this is that I don't think we have a supply problem in multiple family, as evidenced by all the now leased and signs all over the region. I mean, you look at, because I've actually gone to a lot of these developments in Midtown, the Red and places like that, putting my name down. I'm constantly getting emails that will reduce your rent by 2 months. So we have a lot of supply out there at market rate. And incidentally, I'm all in favor of workforce housing. We need that because we're attracting more and more jobs here. And that's something that that I'd like to see even more produced. I've got a question about the motel that you mentioned. What size are those units now that have been
Individual.
converted?
So, I mean, it is literally a Motel 6.
Right.
That each unit was converted into a residential unit. So basically they took like a typical Motel 6. It has, you know, a bedroom and a bathroom, and they modified them and added kitchens. And that is one unit. So it's basically a studio.
Yeah, but what's the square footage of that unit?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look.
Okay. All right, very good. Well, thank you. And thanks for
Thanks,
all you got. And I'm so glad that the council knocked this back out from some of the recommendations the planning commission was making. So thank you for doing this.
Okay.
All right.
All right, we do have some chats. Do you want to go to those first and then we'll take
Sure.
the rest of the hands?
Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and read the chat for the group. It says, are you able to comment about how discussion is proceeding regarding ADUs in the Hidden Valley area? So just as a heads up, we are also separate from the things we talked about today. We are also working on an accessory dwelling unit or ADU ordinance. That's something that council has initiated as well. It's separate from this because again, ADUs is not tied to affordability. I think it's a component of just helping with housing supply. But separate from that, we are going to be going to council on May 8th with some recommendations and then getting feedback from council. And that would be things like, where should they be allowed? What should the parking requirements be? How tall should ADUs be allowed? These are your granny flats. And so we'll get feedback from council in May, and then we'll go out and do stakeholder output or stakeholder meetings to get feedback from the community. And then we'll go back to planning commission and back to city council. So we have about probably 6 to 8 more months worth of public review on ADUs. And then specific to Hidden Valley, it looks like the majority of Hidden Valley is also not in the city of Reno, it's in Washoe County. So from that perspective, anything we do wouldn't affect the bulk of the Hidden Valley area. I believe Washoe County just updated their ADU ordinance, and now I believe they allow ADUs in more areas by right, but you'll need to double check with them. I'm not sure that they're specifically allowed in every zoning district. Okay, and then next question is, how are the neighborhoods selected? Are neighborhoods with homeowners associations included? And then wealthy areas are just more modest neighborhoods. Would that be included? And then importantly, what about parking? How is street parking going to be dealt with in some of these neighborhoods? I'd really like to see parking on property with enforcement. So just generally big picture. This is citywide, anything that has just straight zoning. If you are in what we call a planned unit development, you have a separate set of zoning regulations that would not be impacted by these changes. So a couple examples would be Collin Ranch. Most of that is a big master plan community with its own set of zoning requirements. Somerset has its own planned unit development. Most of South Meadows and Damani area also has its own separate set of zoning districts. Or this planned unit development zoning district. So they would not be applicable to any of these changes. This is strictly just areas of town that have single family or multifamily zoning districts, not in these master plan communities. And then also anything with a homeowners association typically has CC&Rs. a lot of those CCNRs have regulations that say we don't allow duplexes, we don't allow multifamily, we don't allow ADUs. So if you are in a neighborhood that has an HOA and CCNRs, that is an additional regulation. So the city's zoning code does not trump that. Basically, if you live in an area with CCNRs that say there's no duplexes allowed, then we wouldn't be able to allow duplexes to supersede your HOA. And then in terms of parking, just the other question, parking continues to be another one of those topics that people either love it or hate it. I think what we've seen is in a lot of our downtown area, when we have these newer developments, for the most part, these projects come in with very little parking, and our zoning code doesn't require parking in our downtown area. The further out we go into more of these suburban areas, we do have parking requirements, but we have flexibility on that too. So kind of from both perspectives, we've heard a lot of complaints that our parking requirements are too stringent and that we should be more relaxed. And we've heard the opposite, and that we should be more strict on parking. So again, that's something that I don't know that we're going to solve with this affordable housing discussion, but something that definitely our council is hearing quite a bit from both perspectives on. Okay, let me just do maybe a couple more of the chat questions. So one of them is, I live in Double Diamond in a single family home where 4-story apartments were built without public input, which has brought my home value down. So if you're in Double Diamond, you're in one of those areas that is a master plan community and is part of a planned unit development. Most of those developments, South Meadows, Double Diamond, Damani, most of those developments were approved back in the 90s. So they are more than 20 years old. And all of that was approved as part of a bigger master plan community. So it was kind of already decided where single family was going to go, where commercial was going to go, where schools was going to go. So I think from that perspective, it did not go through another public hearing process, but it did go through, 20 plus years ago when all of that master plan was approved. That's one of those things where if you move into a master plan community, you can get a copy of a map that shows potentially what could be built next to you. And that kind of gives you an idea of what could go next to you. So in your case, it sounds like that 4-story apartment went straight to a building permit because it was approved, like I said, 20 plus years ago with the bigger conceptual plan of that master plan community. And then let's do one more of these, or maybe 2 more. So questions on short-term rentals. Would a short-term rental ordinance help the housing strategy? So short-term rental is anything like VRBO or the Airbnb. Citywide, we currently do not regulate where VRBO or the Airbnbs are allowed to go. So they can go anywhere right now. We have no restrictions on them. And I think there's been interest, at least from our city council, in adopting an ordinance that regulates short-term rentals. So at this point, it's not something we're working on here in the next 12 months, but I think it's something as we continue discussions on housing and affordability, we'll be looking at a short-term rental ordinance if city council wants to move forward with that. And then let's do one more from Shelley. I've been told that a hotel is being planned to be built on the lot next to the apartments, directly next to my house. Couldn't tell you at this point. Maybe just, you don't have to do it in the chat, but shoot us an email with maybe kind of where you think the hotel is. We'll have to pull it up and see what we can find on it. It's very possible there's a hotel if you're in that Double Diamond area. There's a lot of development happening. So it could be a number of different things. We'd have to pull up a specific site and see what's being planned.
All right. Maya has another question. I'm going to move her over. All right, Maya, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay. So my follow-up from the last question, it kind of has to do with sort of the interplay and the boundary between the specifically affordable component and the all units market rate component. So like you mentioned that part of this is responding to that Assembly Bill 213 that says we have to do something specifically for affordable housing.
Yep.
And I'm trying to keep up with all the all the slides and everything here. But is there so if I'm not mistaken, there were some things that if it's an affordable project, then it would be allowed some extra height, some extra things. Is there any reason why we couldn't extend that to market rate as well, or would that be sort of violating the spirit of we're trying to do something specific for affordable? Or is there any reason why that would be undesirable? Or I guess I'm like, we want the expedited process part I'm following, but like allowing like more permissive guidelines for the affordable projects. I'm wondering if there's a way we could get those for market rate too, or if that would be sort of not really fitting with the spirit of this particular initiative.
No, and I think that that is a great comment. And I think, again, because there's mixed opinions on that topic, what staff initially proposed was specific to affordable housing. We had some incentives, and then specific to market rate, we had some other incentives. And then I think Planning Commission agreed with that, but also wanted to see it a little bit further, kind of to your point. So they added some additional incentives. But at this point, we now need to take it to City Council to get their feedback. And I think it's definitely not out of the question if City Council, I think, hears enough kind of community interest in allowing more flexibility for market rate. I think that's something that they could be open to. But at this point, we're just collecting more public input to see kind of where the community wants to go.
Okay. And this one should be really simple if I could. The slide about allowing more development by right, the less than 100 units in the different multifamily districts, would the special districts like downtown and midtown be able to benefit from that at all, or is it really specifically just for those districts in the slide?
So specific to those different zoning districts on the slide, the kind of the interesting thing is we have a lot of zoning districts that have no density requirements. A lot of our mixed use, so all of our downtown, unlimited density. You can go basically as tall as you want, as many units as you want. Where we have density limitations is in more of our suburban areas, so definitely in your multifamily zoning districts and some of our commercial zoning districts. So specific to those is where our code currently requires that additional entitlement review between when there's less than 100 units. So it wouldn't be citywide because some zoning districts already right now have unlimited density. And then again, it would not affect any of those planned unit developments that already have their own separate set of zoning standards.
Okay, and then so I think most of Midtown is that MUMC, Midtown Commercial?
There's a portion that's MUNC and then also
then
mixed use
MURes.
res, correct.
Okay, is that outside the scope of this? And does that have? Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head any density requirements in those zones if they have them.
So in the mixed use res, let me just pull up my zoning code real quick and see if there's density. One moment. And Grace or Lauren, if you get there before me.
Because we kind of have that pocket. It looks like we've got mixed use res between like, once you get outside of the Midtown Commercial, there's like some mixed use res before you get into like the pure multifamily over like by Plumas Park.
Yeah, so it looks
Go ahead.
like within that mixed use res, it's a density maximum of 30 units to the acre.
And is that outside of, does that get to fall under this by right proposal, or is that not included?
So they do not trigger that additional entitlement, but they're still limited. They can't build more than 30 units per acre. They could do it by right, though. They don't have to go through that public review process.
Okay, so they're already like that?
Correct.
Okay, so they don't need to be added to this because they already
Correct.
have it? Okay. Great.
All right. Looks like John White is next. Go ahead, John. Looks like you're still on mute. Looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Oh.
We've lost John.
All right, we'll do Jean Johnson. Go ahead, Jean.
Hi, I'm a person who wrote about the parking requirements. I live in the Old Northwest, and there are many, many, many renters here already. And because rents are high, every house is stacked to the brim with cars. And this means cars on lawns. This means cars everywhere. This means cars when the city's trying to plow. That creates extra problems. It also has, I think, in my particular neighborhood, I think everybody that has street parked has had a car that's been totaled by hit and run too. So it's really, it impacts people in a lot of ways. So I guess my point here is, I know people have to live, they have to get somewhere, but I really strongly, strongly urge that parking is a consideration. That you can't just fill up a whole plot with housing and don't apply that, because there isn't the space for it in the old neighborhoods, where it seems like this is where all this is going to happen. It's the old neighborhoods, not any of the new ones.
Yeah, and that's so again, the parking thing, people are either kind of one one opinion or the other. And so I think that's a good kind of perspective too from somebody that lives in one of these kind of older infill neighborhoods. Is in some of these neighborhoods parking is a concern, or lack of available parking is a concern. I think we're trying to balance between many communities have just said, we're not going to have parking requirements at all citywide. And we definitely haven't gone that road or gone that route. Our downtown area, you don't have to provide parking if you don't need to or don't want to. But again, the further out you go, outside of the downtown, closer to more of the suburban areas, we do have parking requirements. And so kind of good feedback to hear both perspectives from folks that feel we should have stronger parking requirements, and others that feel that we should be more open to flexibility. So that's good feedback, Jean.
Yeah, I'm going to keep saying this feedback, really, because it is, I live here and I'm not going anyplace, but it's really hard, and it's hard for everyone. There just isn't anywhere to put your car where you feel safe. Cars are getting broken into. You know the story. And I do think that it behooves the city to consider safety, because this is a safety issue and not just, I don't want a car parked in front of my house kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Okay, that's it. I've said my say.
Thanks, Jean. So it looks like maybe we can get John, if he's able to jump back in.
All right, John, let's try this again. Feel free to unmute. We still can't hear you. If you wanted to try typing it into the chat, or you can always send me an email. Let's try Nona Perry. All right, you should be able to unmute.
I have an unusual property. I live on the river. It's in the west side of town, and several years ago it was moved from residential commercial neighborhood to MF21. So I have 2.5 acres zone MF21. The problem I have is that part of it's in the floodplain, and there are a lot of easements underground for all kinds of things, so that's not buildable either. Would I even qualify for this if I were to build up in a small envelope?
So
I have plenty of parking.
If you wanted to do apartments, you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm kind of old school. I kind of like the concept of small and minimalistic.
Uh-huh.
I have condos right up against my fence line at this point, all along across the river. They're everywhere. They're up above me on 4th Street.
Gotcha.
I just don't. I would like to try maybe like little cabins or something that's not super expensive to build, and yet it, completely is within the codes of a tiny home, but only it's not on wheels.
Yeah, so you could do that today. You don't need any of this
Okay.
amendment to change that. You are allowed to do multifamily today. The one thing that you cannot get around is if there's easements, or if you're in a floodplain, not a whole lot of flexibility to get around that piece, and these changes wouldn't impact that either. But if
Right.
you're zoned for multifamily today, you can do duplex, you can do multifamily, you can do single family, so you can do all that today.
Okay, and I'm not even interested in building on any unbuildable land, but there's still quite a bit left.
Yeah,
It's just that with what's left, it would be
Right.
nice to utilize it as much as possible by going up.
yeah, and even if you wanted
Okay.
to do, like you said, kind of a smaller little cabin,
Right.
400 square feet is the minimum size you could do to be more
Okay.
like a tiny house.
Uh-huh.
That's allowed today by right.
Okay,
So
cool.
if that helps.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, and it looks like that might be the last hand raised, and I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat. So if you think of anything, beyond today's meeting, feel free to reach out by email. I think you all have Grace's email just in the meeting invite. So feel free to reach out to us and we can get back to you. And then we definitely encourage you feedback. Again, we want to hear both sides. That, from staff's perspective, we want to make sure that whatever we bring to council is something that the community can support. So if we're not going down the right path, we definitely want to hear it and let council know that that's not the direction the community wants to go. If it's something you support and you feel we should be doing more, let's share that as well. So the more input we can give to council, I think the better off we are at creating, some positive changes for the community as a whole. So again, May 8th is when this will go to City Council just for feedback and input. They're not making any formal decisions at that meeting, just providing us with some additional feedback. So feel free to reach out to myself or Lauren or Grace, and we can forward those messages to council or send them emails or phone calls directly as well. We do have 2 additional stakeholder meetings this month, or this week actually. So if you or your friends or family members want to hear more, it's going to be the same presentation. But if you think of anything new that you wanted to share, or maybe you missed in the presentation, feel free to join one of our other meetings and we'll hopefully get those questions answered. Okay, and with that, again, we appreciate everyone spending your evening with us, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the public chat. Thanks, everyone.